by running their existing generation fleet, whether it's coal or whether it's whatever it is, it's dirty plants. They really don't care. I mean, utility is not in the business of saving the environment. They're in business of making money using their existing power plants. So they, by definition, something has to happen for them to accept. If we think that business executive or utility chairman suddenly says, you know what, I'm pro-environment, I'm going to close my power plants, I'm going to buy clean energy instead of mine, it's just not going to happen. So that's why we had this renewable portfolio standards and so on. I think partly the problem is the way that we regulated, the way our system works. I think in the 90s we have a big push for sort of deregulation and breaking vertical integrated utilities, so there will be generators separately and distribution and transmission companies. Unfortunately, we regress on that model in many places. So look in state like Ohio, where there is a lot of coal generation and it's mainly integrated utilities. So what they now on the last breath try to save their power plant by entering into long-term power purchase agreement, directly sell from these coal plants to the consumers, saying this is a cheap thing. But what needs to be done is, as Susan mentioned before, either the right policies, okay, whether we have renewable portfolio standard or carbon tax or whatever regulations might be, or if we can change regulatory scheme where these utilities will be financially rewarded for doing something. I mean, for achieving the result that we want them to achieve. It's just not going to happen on its own.
Emery, there are 198 people in this country who are on public utility commissions. They're some of the most unknown individuals in our country, and they have great impact on the future of the electric power industry. It's estimated that $100 billion a year of energy investment decisions in the power sector are made by these public utility commissions. Our organization is working hard to try to help change the business model, to come up with the 21st electric system. Emery, what can accelerate this pace? How do you see the carbon regs by the government, federal government, and the state implementation, and then this sort of transformative potential with the electric utility model? What can work? How can we accelerate the pace of change?
Well, to start closest to home, efforts like yours to help the commissioners understand their opportunities and I think can be extremely helpful. I've worked and toiled in that vineyard for a few decades, and it does pay off after a while. And you often have a very strong jobs and public safety and national security argument as well. It's a very trans-ideological story, especially if you come arm in arm with rather unexpected partners like major customers and environmental groups, all saying we want the same kind of reform. And an interesting model could be decoupling and shared savings, which we now have in, I think it's 16 states for electricity, 20 for gas.
Just very quickly, for those decoupling,
that's rewarding utilities for cutting your bill, not for selling you more energy. And that has a profound effect on their culture and behavior. It's actually supported by the trade organizations of the electric and gas utilities. Gas utilities pushed it hard when they suffered demand destruction because it would protect their revenues. And now electric utilities, with demand shrinking ever since 2007, are starting to have the same imperative, and that will accelerate it. And you know, utilities, to their credit, put $7 billion into efficiency investments last year. So the deal is you decouple their revenues from their energy sales, so they're not rewarded for selling more or penalized for selling less. That would also, by the way, protect them against third-party generators taking their market. And you let them keep a small part, maybe a tenth of the savings they achieve for the customers. They get to keep that as extra profit. Well, I don't mind giving them a little bit of what it takes or the savings achieved by switching to renewables. I think if they have some incentive, they will have the experience that one of my predecessors as RMI chairman had when his efficiency division added I think it was almost $40 billion to a large utility's bottom line one year, had no cost and no risk to the company, And he says what happens then is the CEO calls you up every week and says, is there anything you need? And all the smartest people want to come work for you to advance their career. I'd like to see the same thing getting into resilient renewable supply.
Emery, can I interject a question? Do you think it's possible for decoupling, for example, in a state that's not have that policy, to that be part of their plan for the carbon reduction?
There are a lot of ways to design it. Regulatory assistance project can help. Now, if you then zoom out a bit from the educational and political tools, I think the other biggest thing you can do is work both with the utilities and with their new competitors. At Rocky Mountain Institute, we actually have 2 electricity practices, one working with incumbents, one with insurgents, or if you like, one with defenders, one with attackers, because competition is good. And then they can all come together in our E-Lab, Electricity Innovation Lab, with 40-odd other leaders in the electricity space to figure out the next industry, the new business and revenue and regulatory models, grid integration, grid security, all the hard stuff. And that's an opportunity for the incumbents and insurgents to actually talk to each other and create mutual value rather than just lobbing grenades in public. So there are a number of quiet efforts like this going on with multiple stakeholders over a number of years to handle the biggest, most profound, most numerous and diverse disruptions any sector's had in our lifetime, because we've basically got, as you implied, 21st century technology and speed colliding head-on with 20th and 19th century institutions, rules, and cultures. A lot of stuff is going to break. We want to keep the lights on meanwhile. It's the convergence of efficiency, demand response, renewables, other distributed generators like modern renewables plus cogen make a quarter of the world's electricity now. And all that stuff together, plus IT meets electricity, the information-rich grid that's coming at us, and turning customers into prosumers who can make their own, that's changing everything. So the new business model has to start from the realization that customers are figuring out something really simple. They're going to want to buy less electricity and more efficiency, and they're going to want to make more of the electricity themselves, and they'll have a lot more control over their choices. And it's really a good idea to sell them what they want before someone else does. So that's where some industry leaders like David Crane at Energy are going. He wrote a piece recently in a trade journal addressing in the first paragraph his fellow utility CEOs saying, I hope you don't believe anything I'm going to tell you in this article, because as long as you keep not believing it, I'm going to eat your lunch.
Barriers to success. Susan, what do you see as a leader of a leading wind energy development company to the barriers to getting us to this 21st century electricity system? And then, Michael, maybe you could comment on that. What's the resistance? Why are we not getting this done? Why don't we have the opportunity to have more clean energy and more growth of these outstanding clean energy companies? What are those barriers?
Well, I would say the biggest barrier is demand, because we don't have the market signals really right now that are going to reward carbon-free electricity. That's, to my mind, that is the biggest problem we have right now, that we just don't have policy that values carbon, or that values the carbon-free aspects of wind energy.
So to pick up on that, Tom Steyer mentioned the Ohio reversal, and it's my understanding that there were $3 billion worth of wind energy projects that are now not able to go forward because of the policy change abruptly carried off sort of in the dark of the night at the last part of the legislative session that quote-unquote suspended the energy efficiency and renewable portfolio standard. So that's a barrier where you have opponents coming in and really taking apart a bipartisan policy that was set up in 2007 or 8 and ended up now not having the momentum of the marketplace.
But can I just say on that policy,
keeping
though?
It was supported by the business community.
Right.
But, I think what's important is to understand that electricity is a balanced system. Whatever is produced is consumed. in most cases, okay? So really in this country, I always keep saying we don't really have shortage of electricity. We have enough resources to support. So when we produce 1 kilowatt hour from renewables, it's 1 kilowatt hour displaced, produced by something else. So who is the opponent in this country of clean energy? The only one opponent, electric utilities, because you displace them. Everybody, or generators, maybe independent generators.
But then there's the coal industry, the gas
industry. No, but those are collateral. Those are industry sells to them.
Yeah.
Okay, but so that's the whole thing. Public is for it. People are for it. Even politicians for it, unless their constituency. So these are the people are against. So I agree that we need demand, but the point is that energy, it's not like a high-tech industry. You invent a new device, you invent new industry, and there is brand new demand showing up, and you make these new gadgets. In electricity, we make the same kilowatt hour, whether we make from renewables, from solar, from coal, from nuclear. It's the same. There is no distinction.
So, Michael, how do you overcome the barrier? What do you do to get the change?
That's what I'm saying. That's what I started this. You have to make sure that people that fight in the displacement of their energy are either have incentive to change or they're being forced to change. RPS, by the way, it's a force to change. You know, most utilities are objecting to RPS with the exceptions of few. So that's my whole point.
But the customers and the regulators, you know, I put up the slide about some of these big, large, carbon-conscious companies that are actually seeking out renewable energy. And it's sometimes difficult for them to buy it directly from the developer. They have to go through the utilities, and it's all sort of complicated, and they have to become energy managers. So, you know, making it easier for people to get access to renewable energy and having those customers demand it. And the bigger the customers, the more impact they can have in demanding.
Also, it's not just utilities, because we have regional grid operators, grid organizations. It's a very complex, tangled landscape right now. But in about 3/5 of the states, for example, efficiency and demand response can now compete head against new supply, and they generally win. Well, where we have that kind of competition, renewables also win, and there are, admittedly with razor-thin margins, wind developers in windy places like in the parts of the Midwest selling at 2 or 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour, incredibly cheap power, and that undercuts most existing power plants, let alone any new ones, because the technology and the operations keep improving. But another powerful actor coming in now is major customers. You have some very large companies that have decided what's happening to climate and grid security and so on is bad for their business, and they are entering large contracts for example, wind power or solar power. And at RMI, we actually have a new effort to share best practices in purchasing, because when a company announces a policy, we're going to buy all renewable electricity, typically the purchasing people have no idea how to do that. So we're putting together both a network and a bunch of tools to help them do that, and they will then start entering bilateral contracts and going around the utilities. Utilities, again, are going to have to adapt or lose market share, because they don't have a monopoly anymore except in a handful of southeast states like Georgia, where they claim such a monopoly that if I try to finance solar on your roof, they'll say that makes me a utility and I have to be regulated by the commission, which is an utterly ridiculous idea. I'm not selling electricity, I'm selling money. But that sort of thing needs to come to court.
We also promised that we try to have at the end of the day here some questions for our panel. And let's see if we can turn to those now at this point. Put my hand up here so I can see, and maybe we can get a microphone to come around. Everybody is having late afternoon. Oh, good. Some hands up. One in the back room, and then in the white shirt next.
Yeah. Hi, this is Andy Beher from As You Sow. We do a lot of shareholder advocacy, and particularly we file resolutions with utility companies. And last year we engaged with both First Energy and Southern, pointing out that they're losing market share because the big box stores are putting up their own solar because they can lock in a 20-year rate. They have to still maintain their lines. It's just not a winning business model. Both organizations agreed to write reports for us, but then we see that they're playing games politically to try to block distributed power, when in fact what we're pushing for is more distributed power. How do we play that game with them? How do shareholders get the utilities to actually start to promote and to own distributed power to save their own market share?
Well, we put out a report some months ago called The Economics of Grid Defection, pointing out that like 10 or 15% of households in Oahu are making their own solar power, so much that it's overwhelming the utilities' ability to get their heads around it and even cope technically in some cases. So some of those people are dropping off the grid altogether, and we said, when will that grid parity arrive to households all over the country? Well, it turns out it spreads across the country well within the time horizon of the lifetime of utility assets now being amortized and depreciated. And that really got the industry's attention. Barclays downgraded the whole U.S. utility sector one notch, saying their business models aren't ready for that kind of competition. Head of National Grid said he thought our study was conservative. Actually, we did too. So competition is a really good way to get everybody's attention. And another way is to do what happened in Georgia, where the swing vote on a very unexpected 3-2 vote on the commission to empower solar and reduce central plant construction came from a Tea Partier, Bubba McDonald. I'd been talking to him about solar economics. A lot of people had bent his ear, but it turns out he hates monopolies and loves competition. He's a real conservative. And there are a lot of them out there, some of whom are commissioners.
Another question here. Microphone, thank you.
Thanks. I was just listening. Michael, can you tell us more about your solar work? Did I hear correctly that you're getting into solar?
Yeah, we do. We were a little late in solar because we were kind of busy on wind, and but you know there are many solar models out there. Some people do, you know, roof like Solar City type. You know, we do more ground-mounted solar systems. So obviously there is an interesting situation going on too in the industry between sort of, I would say, some disagreement between ground systems and roof systems, because it's a different economics. When you generate on the ground, you sell at the wholesale. When you generate on the roof, you sell at retail rate. So, for example, you can now make solar for 5 cents a kilowatt hour in California, and people that generate on their roofs are being paid 18 cents a kilowatt hour. So there is a little movement going on here to fix it. This is not we don't do roof systems.
But it's worthwhile for both. That's the point. They both have good markets. There's a person at this conference who can beat 8-cent retail power with stuff mounted on the ground. That sort of thing is spreading fast. Grid parity is rising up.
What we see also here that solar gaining a lot of ground on wind, in many places, because for two reasons. One is that obviously wind is concentrated in certain areas, so solar is more widely distributed. But more importantly, solar is a scalable. You can build very small solar installation and very large, and costs are not different too much.
Yeah.
When wind, you need really large plant, and this scalability of solar really changed the whole map.
And that's starting to change now with new kinds of wind turbines that are smaller and meant for lower wind speed areas.
Microphone over here, please. Another question?
Hi, I'm Clara, Director for Climate and Energy at Fenton. I'm actually a renter. I don't have a house. I don't own a home. But in my city, New York City, we have this amazing program. Con Edison has a green team where you can actually you can choose to have your energy delivered to you from renewable sources. Mm-hmm. And as a tenant, that's really attractive because it means I don't have to do anything except for check a box. Is this model spreading around the country? I only have familiarity with my New York City address, but I'm wondering what you guys think about the model and whether it's spreading and if it has potential to grow.
How widespread is that now, Susan? I know I buy wind power at night here just down Valley. and I make solar in the daytime.
I think it's basically at the customer. I mean, many utilities, even go to Nebraska, it's available there. I mean, there are a lot of programs like this. I'm not sure how. In some cases, also utility playing games. They're telling customers it's going to be a lot more expensive. I can tell you from my experience, and I am on the ground all the time, sort of working with the developers and everything. You can design green program now that it will not cost you any more than the existing program. So all this, I remember, I met one governor from New Jersey, and I was telling him how great is renewables and wind, and he said, oh, but Jersey Power and Light told me it's 18 cents a kilowatt hour. So, that there is a lot of myths or misrepresentation that renewable costs more. I tell you, by the way, Susan showed all this list of all these companies that buying renewables. They're not buying renewables because only renewables. Walmart would not buy 1 kilowatt hour of electricity from renewables if it costs more than conventional. They're all buying for one reason, because it's cheaper for them.
And it's consistently cheaper.
Exactly.
Unlike gas prices, which
so
are
they
volatile.
not try to save the world. They try to buy cheaper and then put on their annual report that they're saving the world.
Let me jump in for just a second from your New York question. Emery's organization and our organization are, I believe, trying to help transform the business model. And you have in Audrey Zibelman, the new chair of the PSC, an incredible entrepreneur, Richard Kaufman. And so EEE, with those two, holding a gathering together with advanced energy companies ranging from Microsoft and Verizon and Landis+Gyr and lots of companies, about 10 of them all total, and the electric utilities. We held a 2-day session to discuss the very question of what do you need in the business model to encourage investment, to improve resiliency, be prepared for the next hurricane, be prepared for next climate disaster, talk about distributed energy, talk about microgrids, talk about the fact that during the hurricane you had NYU with its cogeneration and its ability to continue to sustain locally produced energy. So we think New York is in a very unique position, along with Massachusetts, Hawaii, and a few other states, to actually provide the transformational model. Many other states are looking at what is going on in New York so that consumers like you can get better power, more reliable, clean power, less expensive, and most importantly, be sure it's there for you, that it's available, that it actually operates.
There's also help on the way from financial innovation. That's been behind a lot of the solar revolution, and we're piloting an effort right now with solar and financial companies to have the equivalent of a FICO score for a commercial sector solar project, like on the roof of a warehouse or a big box store, because that isn't quite big enough to get easy project financing, and it isn't small and diversified enough to aggregate the way, say, Solar City does with residential projects. But with the true solar score, as we call it, financiers will be able to make aggregated portfolios and securitize them and so on, and all the good stuff that gets cheap capital flowing.
I think we've come to sort of the end of our day of discussions. I want to thank each of our panel members. And Susan, thank you for your presentation. We look forward to a great day tomorrow. Thank you very much.